So, if you know me well at all, you probably have had to endure me talking about world history, American history. I've got a stack of books on my bedside table. That's all it is, biographies and histories. Um, that means my favorite kind of reading material is historical nonfiction and biographies. And I binge watch documentary series whenever we travel someplace. I bore Ellen to tears because prior to going, I've looked up all kinds of mind numbing trivia about wherever we happen to be. I'll say stuff like, "Do you realize that in 1743, this is where Benjamin Franklin got his shoes repaired?" That kind of thing. She'll just stare at me and say, "You're amazing," which has more than one meaning, I've come to learn. I can't even remember to feed the dog, but I know in excruciating detail what happened at the Battle of Gettysburg. So imagine my delight a while back when I discovered a website called On This Day. On This Day gives you a timeline of notable events that happened throughout history on any day of the year. For instance, this is June 26th, so here's just a sampling of things that happened on June 26th. In 1498, the toothbrush was invented in China. In 1721, in Boston, Dr. Zabdiel Boylston gave the first smallpox inoculations in America. Ouch. In 1892, the author Pearl S. Buck was born. In 1911, Babe Dietrichson Zacharias, the all-around golf and Olympics athlete, was born. In 1938, James Weldon Johnson, the Harlem Renaissance poet, lyricist, and civil rights activist, died. In 1945, in San Francisco, the United Nations Charter was signed by 50 nations. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy gave his famous "I Am a Berliner" speech at the Berlin Wall. In 1977, in Indianapolis, Elvis Presley performed his last concert before dying. Left the building first. In 1977, Harry Potter book, the first one, was published. In 2003, the case of Lawrence versus Texas, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that gender-based sodomy laws were unconstitutional, officially putting an end to homosexuality being a crime in Texas and elsewhere. All of those things happened on this date, June 26th. There are 365 days of the year, so on any day of the year, it's the date when something interesting's happened. It's also the date when a lot of nothing happened, or at least not much, a slow news day, as they say. June 26th was also probably the date when I did the laundry or got my eyes examined or planted a rose bush. But for plenty of people all over the world and all through history, June 26th was the date when something a lot more substantial happened. They took their first steps, or they learned how to swim, or they rode a bicycle for the first time, or they started reading, or they first performed a solo in front of an audience, or they were first kissed, or they got married. There are probably tons of June 26 weddings. Or they bought their first home, or they started their first job. It's also the date when someone got divorced, or they learned they had cancer, or they watched someone they loved pass away. June 26 is the day in history when someone who had been discriminated against sat down at a lunch counter in protest. It's the day when a person stopped drinking. Or they decided that enough was enough and they picked up the phone and they called an old friend who had become an enemy and they said, "Hey, can we talk? I miss you. We need to figure this out." It's the day someone showed up at the front door not knowing if they would ever be welcomed home again, and they were met by hugs and tears of joy. It's a day of cowardice and courage. It's a day of happiness and sorrow. It's a day like any other day, and a day like no other day. It's the day in history when countless people took their first baby steps on the journey of rediscovering their connection to the holiness in life. Maybe they had a heart-to-heart talk with a friend, or they picked up a book that day, even a Bible, and said, "I need to find myself again." All of those things happen every day of the year, all over the world and throughout human history, and they're no less remarkable than all of that stuff on a website that lists the things that get recorded in the history books. Now, for me, the benefit of a website like On This Day is that perspective that it provides, the perspective that, yes, the people whose births and deaths and achievements do get recorded for posterity, those are interesting enough. The things that they did matter. But they're really just representing something far greater, because the things the rest of us do matter too. They might matter more, really, those everyday events that we navigate, whether we perceive them to be good, bad, or indifferent, life changing, or just a small gesture or routine. The sheer quantity of our thoughts and actions in a single day all add up. They add up for each one of us, and combined with everything that we all do, that it is an amazing, incalculable amount of human history in the making in just one day. Now, I might be guilty of overusing a certain word to describe all that we think about and do in our lifetimes, but I think it's the best description, so I hope you'll bear with me. It is the word journey. In the Bible and the Psalms, for instance, we'll often see a journey described as a path or pathway. Psalm 16 is one of the many great examples of this. It's a psalm of protection, a prayer, really, asking God to watch over and to be with you every step of the way. It's a beautiful piece of poetry. And at the end, the psalmist says this: "You show me the path of life. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore." In the pathway of life. For those of us who grew up in a religious setting where we were taught about hard and fast rules and absolutes about God and our beliefs about God, the idea of being on a spiritual journey throughout your lifetime might sound odd, maybe even scandalous, because a big assumption is that since the hard and fast absolute rules can never change, then it is wrong for us to question them. It is wrong for us to rethink our beliefs or to widen the scope of our faith to include people and ideas that we were taught from an early age simply don't belong or they're incorrect. So I get that. I really do. Not only is there comfort and assurance in it, there's a sense of something you can count on when the world around us is changing so fast, makes your head swim. But in that way of thinking about our personal spirituality, unfortunately, our faith can easily turn into a kind of fortress built to rebuff and reject the changes that are happening all around us, whether we like it or not. So religion then turns into a countercultural thing. Whatever is happening in the world that appears at first glance to challenge my beliefs must be wrong, or they must be sinful, and I must fight against them, vote against them, and even protest against them. Again, I understand that way of thinking about faith. I truly do, because I grew up with that and I held on to it for many years. But then I got interested in history. I don't know why, just natural curiosity, I guess. I'd visit someplace and wonder, well, what happened on this spot 100 years ago? Has this corner of town always looked this way? And where did the things that we take for granted, like the telephone or cars or even the houses we live in, who came up with those ideas for how all of that stuff works? Why do doors always have doorknobs on the left side and not on the right side? Who decided that and why? I wanted to know who wrote the Bible. And boy, did that ever lead me down a path. I also became a fan of cemeteries. Now, I know that might sound kind of creepy, but my God, the amount of history, all the stories of those lives represented by those stone markers is mind-boggling. At an early age, I found that talking with people who were much older than me was really fascinating. When I was in high school, I had to write this paper for a history class. So I decided to write something about World War II. I knew my teacher would really like it because he was a World War II veteran, and I figured, well, that'll be an easy A. And I also knew that a member of my church had been a pilot in that war. Not just any pilot, but he had flown P-51 Mustangs, which were at the time the fastest, coolest, most powerful airplanes in the sky. They were turbocharged muscle cars with wings. So I interviewed him. Me, a 17-year-old, hearing firsthand from a guy who, when he wasn't much older than I was at the time, had risked his life to liberate Europe from tyranny. In that interview, he laughed and he cried and he talked about how hard it was to know for certain that when he flew over a train and shot it to smithereens, he might be killing innocent people instead of the enemy, but that he knew that even the enemy had families and friends, and how he hoped and prayed God would forgive him for what he had done. All he could say was, I surely hope so. His experience wasn't history for him, it was alive as yesterday, and listening to him brought it to life for me. Now, everyone else called him a hero, like he'd done something once long ago and it was in the history books, but he was still on a journey of working through and walking through and figuring out his life. He told me, one thing's for certain, things change. My life sure changed way back then, and it keeps on changing. I can't stop it, he said. All I can do is my best and try to be at peace with it and find some joy in it. His words, his history, his journey still live with me, and it's really helped me understand that what we see and think and do every day, the history we're part of and the history that we make, is our journey. And right alongside that, our faith is on a journey. I don't think it's meant to be understood as standing still, hard and fast, like a fortress, but as a pathway for us to explore. And our journey changes on that path. It evolves, it grows, it converges, and then it splits, and then it comes together again. But we keep on wandering, and on every day of our history, a new story emerges. As a tool to navigate all of that, the prayer of Psalm 16 makes perfect sense. It's a prayer and a promise to take that journey with confidence and peace, and to anticipate joy in what we will discover. You show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy. In your right hand are pleasures forevermore.